In Dead by Daylight, one really under-talked about system is the classes of perks. What I mean by that is some perks fall under certain categories that are normally distinguished by the class they fall into, followed by a colon and the name, i.e. boon, colon, circle of healing. Perks that fall under the same class have the same setup with different powers for each. For example, all boons require you to bless a totem and then have their effects happen in a 24-meter range. All teamwork perks require you to heal or have a teammate heal you. And all hex perks give off a fucking pheromone that allows survivors to find every single one instantly before you can ever get value from them, except when you're playing survivor, in which case the things apparently spawned out of the bounds because you can swear you've searched this entire map 100 times and you still can't find the blasted Devour Hope that keeps getting all your teammates killed because they keep teabagging at the hag. And in Driven by Dark, there are currently 4 classes of perks, the 3 I just mentioned, Boons, Teamwork, and Hex, and the one we're going to be talking about today, Scourge Hook. Welcome to the first installment of my great discussion series, where we pick a topic in Dead by Daylight and cover everything around that topic, including going over how it works, what things are related to that topic, any changes I'd make, questions about the topic like should we have more or is it unhealthy, and as I just stated today, we're going to be covering Scourge Hooks. The best place to start is what is a Scourge Hook? Scourge hooks are white hooks that take the place of normal hooks throughout the maps. Basement hooks cannot become Scourge hooks without a certain perk we'll talk about later, and Scourge hooks only spawn if you have a Scourge hook perk equipped. There can only ever be 4 Scourge hook perks in play, unless you have a perk I'll talk about later, and having multiple Scourge hook perks will only stack upon existing Scourge hooks and not create more. Scourge hooks incur special effects when a survivor is either hooked or unhooked from them. Scourge hooks have no spawn logic, so there isn't a certain distances or landmark that marks what's more likely to have a Scourge hook, and it is entirely possible to have all 4 of your Scourge hooks spawn right next to each other. The interesting thing is that if you have Jake Park's perk Saboteur equipped, Scourge hooks will show up in yellow instead of white for survivors, while normal hooks have white auras. I'm not exactly sure why this is, but it can get kind of confusing when you first start using the Saboteur perk. Moving on, let's talk about the strengths and weaknesses of Scourge hooks in general, and then we will cover the individual perks in the roster. Scourge hook's biggest strength is the passive ability you have for simply achieving your goal of hooking survivors. Outside of one perk in particular, Scourge hooks are always in effect and will always provide value throughout the match. Outside of a breakdown or a strong sabotage, survivors cannot rob you of this value. Map RNG, however, can. The biggest weakness of Scourge hooks is that there is no spawn logic to them. Because of the fact that there's no safeguards in place to assist Scourge hooks spawning in, say, each corner of the map, there's nothing to stop them from spawning in dumb places. An example of this is my play game that I posted yesterday, where I had all 4 of my Scourge hooks at main, basically meaning if I were to ever down a survivor away from main, I would lose access to my Scourges. Because of this, many people attempt to run the perk Agitation, which grants the killer 15% movement speed when carrying a survivor, meaning it's easier to make it to your Scourge hooks. But I don't fully recommend this. Scourge hooks, because they are a passive power activated by simply doing your goal, are very tempting to waste time walking to. And this can end up hurting you in the long run. It's almost always better to hook on the closest hook rather than take an extra 8 to 10 seconds to make it to a Scourge hook. Instead, you need to read the situation. Decide if the power that hook will give you is worth the extra seconds needed to reach it. If I were to change anything about Scourge hooks in general, it would be to make a spawn logic of them. I would implement some sort of zones in the map, have every single map divided into 4 equal zones, and then only one Scourge hook can appear in those zones at a time. Hopefully trying to make it to where the Scourge hooks do not spawn in a cluster next to each other. The only way I can see this being a little bit of a pain in the ass is on something like, say, Mid-Bitch or RPD, where you might have all your Scourge hooks only spawn on the upper floor, which has happened to me, and then everybody only goes down on the bottom floor because you have shit luck because you're playing Dead by Daylight. But evenly spreading out the Scourges and preventing you from getting RNG fucked would be the best change to make to them, and I feel like it's a buff they really need. So now we know how they work, their strengths and their weaknesses, and a few tips about using them. Let's cover each of the individual Scourge hook perks, when and how to use them, and whether or not I believe any changes need to be made to them in the process. Now, to my surprise, there are only 5 Scourge hook perks. In my brain, there were far more. But anyway, the first up on the wiki is Scourge Hook Floods of Rage. Coming from Sadako's Teachables, Flood states that when a survivor is unhooked from the Scourge Hook, the auras of all other survivors who were not just unhooked are revealed to you as the killer for 5, 6, or 7 seconds. This is one of the best info perks in the game, if you are a killer who can consistently get downs. The best use of this perk is to combo it with either another Scourge Hook perk or with Lethal Pursuer. A lot of times, when people put Lethal Pursuer into a build, they desperately look for aura reading perks as to not waste the second part of Lethal Pursuer. If you're not aware, Lethal Pursuer is a teachable from Nemesis and says, you see the auras of all survivors at the beginning of the match for 7, 8, or 9 seconds, and all aura reading abilities have their timers extended by 2 seconds. Overall, I think Floods is a finely balanced perk, sitting somewhere in the high B tier for me because of its versatility. Unfortunately, outside of Nurse, Blight, Artist, it really isn't all that useful, and its main use outside of those killers is more to help you with your decision making. If you're someone who often finds themselves lost and unsure of where to go, this helps you find your next target fairly easily, especially when you combine it with the aforementioned Lethal Pursuer. In some niche situations, if the unhook happens during a chase, then the aura of the person you're chasing can help you win the mind game. But outside of that, it's a powerful perk that finds itself rarely used because of the fact that other aura reading perks are just better in that slot most of the time. However, some other good synergies with this perk are Make Your Choice, which comes from Pig and causes a survivor who unhooks when outside of a 32-meter radius to scream and become exposed for 40, 50, or 60 seconds. Furtive Chase from Ghostface gives you undetectable and haste for 16, 17, or 18 seconds when you hook the obsession, but also when someone unhooks the obsession, they become the obsession. So you get the person who unhooked to be highlighted whenever they're unhooked during the Floods of Rage. And also the Hex perk from Hag, Devour Hope. As you gain tokens when you are 32 meters away from an unhook and at 3 tokens, survivors become exposed. If you set this up and then leave the hook when someone gets unhooked, you'll be able to see your closest target and hit them with the exposed. Next up, we have the Pinhead Teachable Scourge Hook Gift of Pain, and this one may be a tad confusing, but stay with me. When a survivor is hooked on a Scourge Hook, they instantly suffer from hemorrhage and mangled. While hemorrhage, survivors drop more pools of blood more often, and if healing is interrupted, they lose 7% of healing per second if they are not healed up fully. While mangled, healing speeds are reduced by 20%, but this only applies from the injured to healthy and does not apply to the dying state or to the deep wound state. Survivors will suffer from these two effects until fully healed. However, once healed, they suffer a second effect. Survivors healed will repair and heal others at 10, 13, or 16% reduced rate until injured again. This is the second strongest Scourge Hook and honestly is a tad underrated in my opinion. I really like this as a slowdown perk because 16% is a lot slower than you think it is. And even though the perk goes away when they are injured again, it's still 2 sets of slowdowns. Them being healed is slower and then them repairing gens is slower. If you can manage to spread this out over 2 to 3 survivors, it really begins to take its toll. Sometimes survivors would rather just stay injured than suffer the slowdown. Good synergies with this outside of other Scourge perks are perks like the Knight's Hex Face the Darkness, which will cause survivors outside of your terror radius to scream every 30 seconds while the last person you injured is injured. So if you're currently on someone's ass and someone gets unhooked a ways away, the hemorrhage will kick in when the scream happens and reduce the healing they were trying to give, slowing them down even further. Gen regressing perks like Pop Goes the Weasel from Clown, which activates after a hook, makes it to where the next time you kick a gen, the gen loses 25% of its current progress, or Overcharge from Doctor, which increases gen regression speed you kick by 85% to 130% over the next 30 seconds. Also, it attaches a permanent difficult skill check to the gen, and if it's missed, will instantly regress the gen by 2, 3, or 4%. The reasons these work so well, particularly with Pop, is once a survivor is unhooked and they healed up, they will have a harder time catching the gen back up to all the regression you've applied. Next up, we have not only the worst Scourge Hook on this list, but one of the worst perks in the entire game. Scourge Hook Hangman's Trick is a pig perk that recently got nerfed by becoming a Scourge Hook to begin with. When a survivor starts sabotaging any hooks, you get a loud noise notification, which is useless because you get a loud noise notification when they finish. And if you are close enough to the hook to stop them, then you can see them. And then, while carrying a survivor, the auras of all survivors within 8, 9, or 10 meters of the Scourge Hook are revealed to you. The old ore reading effect was just whenever carrying a survivor, the ores of all survivors that were in like a 3, 4, 5 meter radius or something like that of a hook were revealed, which was dog shit, don't get me wrong, but this one is way worse. There are not tips for using this perk. Don't use this perk. If you want this perk's effect, use Wesker's Awakened Awareness, which lets you see the auras of all survivors in 20 meters of you while you are carrying a survivor. Instead, let's talk about how I would change this perk. I like the idea of attempting to sabo a hook instead injures a survivor. This does not need to be a Scourge hook. It can be a simple injure a survivor who attempts to sabotage a hook or deep wound them if they are injured, and give it a 60, 45, 30-second cooldown or something like that. It'd still be bad, but it'd be infinitely more useful than this. And it'd also be funny to see someone who's doing a Sabotage 12 Hooks quest just get randomly injured from across the map for no reason. Next up, we have the general Scourge perk, Monstrous Shrine. Unlike other Scourge hook perks, this perk turns 4 hooks in the basement into Scourge hooks. Then, when you were at least 24 meters away from a survivor on a Scourge hook, they died 10, 15, or 20% faster. On the surface, this perk is not that bad, honestly. Not great, but not that bad. I think the range you need to be away is its biggest downfall. I think 20 meters away is fine, but if you watch my Thursday video, and I know you did because you want Daddy Kaiser's approval, and so you watch all my videos, then you'll know I advocated for making the Monstrous Shrine effect base kit for basement hooks, and I stand by that. In my opinion, this should become base kit, and the perk should instead stop being a Scourge hook, and instead make survivors who enter the basement scream and become hindered for, say, 10, 15, 20% while in the basement, and that lingers for 5 seconds after they leave the basement. But for now, if you wanted to run this perk, I'd say it's a good staple in Scourge hook builds, as that's really its only synergy. Run it with Pain Res, Gift of Pain, and Floods of Rage, and it can be kinda neato. It works best on killers like Sadako, Dredge, Freddy, Blight, and Spirit, or any other killer that can get away from the hook quickly and return to it just as quickly to capitalize on an unhook. Finally, we have Pain Resonance, which is hands down the best Scourge hook perk and one of the best perks in the entire game. It's an artist perk, and you start the trial with 4 tokens. Each time you hook a survivor on a Scourge hook for the first time per survivor, lose a token and then blow the generator with the most progress for 15, 20, or 25% of its total progression bar, meaning if a gen is at 25% done, it resets to 0. Now, I know we've all seen the problematic perks video from Otz, and his suggestion this perk needs to be nerfed again is actually insane to me. This perk is infinite times weaker than its old state and right now, and it's probably one of the most balanced perks in the game. You only get 4 chances, and if you can't catch a survivor or Scourge RNG isn't in your favor that match, well then you don't get your full use out of it. It's very similar to Pig's slowdown, but nowhere near as useless as she is. If you manage to blow all your slowdown in the beginning of the match, it doesn't really matter. If you try and spread it out, it can cost you heavily if you don't do it correctly. And don't forget about the Pain Res Curse, which states that a gen will be finished the nanosecond before you finish the hooking animation, so instead of preventing a gen from finishing, you will blow a random corner gen that's been at 3% all game because you chased the Claudette off of it once and now she's been hiding in a locker on the other side of the map. My recommendations is to run this in every single build. Unless your build focuses on one specific thing, this is the best gen slowdown perk in the game and there's no beating it. So we've covered every Scourge hook perk, we've covered how Scourge hooks work, how I would change each perk, and how they work. Now to tackle the big question. Do we need Scourge hook perks, and are Scourge hook perks healthy for the game? To answer the first question, yes. Scourge hooks have so much potential. We can have a perk that makes it to where unhooking someone injures you, but gives you endurance for like 5 seconds or something. Or one that causes a generator to be blocked when someone is hooked. I like the idea of more Scourge hook perks that increase the number of Scourge hooks when equipped. I also like the idea of Scourge hooks that cause more map-wide effects like Floods does. Maybe one that when a survivor is hooked, all other survivors scream or something like that. More Scourge hooks that cause blindness, oblivious, injure, etc, etc. There's so much you can do with them because as a concept, Scourge hooks are the most fair mechanic in the game. They reward the killer for being proactive and doing their objective over bleeding everyone out or cock teasing the anti-face camp radius. But overall, I hope more Scourge hooks are added in the future. Hell, give me a killer with only Scourge hook perks. I'd be happy. Well, happy until the voices start again. But the second question, are they healthy for the game? Yes. Absolutely. Like I just said, the thing about Scourge hooks is that they are reward for being proactive. They are reward for doing your objective. They are something that encourages killers to actively get as many hook states as possible, which is something that doesn't really happen often. If you want to get the most out of your Scourge hook perks, then you need to be hooking everybody as much as possible. I also like the fact that Scourge hooks encourage a bit of caution, right? So for example, you may have your pain resonance up and you've gotten 2 of your 4, and then you catch someone who's on death hook right underneath a Scourge hook. You have a decision to make. Do you waste that Scourge hook and let it break because you have to hook that death hook person? Or do you move on and go do something else and try to get them onto a different hook or something like that so that you can save that in case you need it for later? Overall, I think Scourge hooks are one of the most underused classifications of perks in the game, and I think that they need a lot more. We have far more hex perks in the game that really don't do anything, and I truly and honestly believe that more of those effects should have went to Scourge hooks, because Scourge hooks cannot be robbed as easily. Oh, well, that's the point of hexes. They're supposed to be super powerful because they can be taken down so easily. You know what? I'm going to do another video on that sometime in the future, not right now, but I just want you to know that hexes are really, really bad for a lot of reasons. But yeah. That's the video, guys. Don't forget to let me know what you think down below. What's your favorite Scourge hook? Why and what kind of Scourge hooks would you like to see? Sorry this video was so long, but I loved making it so much. As always, a special thank you to my channel members, The Cannibal Main, Alex Balix, Ryan Gesture, Tabasco Raccoon, Spirit Upgrades, and Nuclear Bomb for their additional support. If you want to know how to get special thanks at the end of every video, as well as additional perks, click that join button down below. I love you all, and I will see you in the next one.